How is everyone?
Okay.
Okay. Good. Good. So this is our last class on Prajna, um, and some of you were part of the fall's conversations on the paramitas, and so this reminder that Buddhism does this thing all the time where there's 6 paramitas, and one of the 6 paramitas is Prajna, but Prajna is actually all of them. And then we've been talking about the 5 mystic eyes. One of the mystic eyes is Prajna, but it's not the big Prajna we're talking about. And the 5th mystic eye is the Buddha eye, which is all of them. So, the ways in which inside and outside and scale is played with in this South Asian, East Asian mindset is, I think, always fun to wrap our minds around. So anyway, we are going to be concluding our conversations on Prajna, which is actually concluding our conversations on the paramitas, but setting us up for the practice term where the focus in the Tuesday evening classes is very much this threefold training of Zen, Prajna, Samadhi, or concentration, and Shila, or ethics. So just a reminder that GK is going to be starting teaching the course on Samadhi. I'm trying to remember, Encountering Samadhi, I think that's the title of it. I think she ended up calling hers Encountering Samadhi, and so I called this Embracing Prajna, and then I'll finish up the term by teaching another ing word with Shila, and I think it's living Shila. There's something ing Shila. So there we have it, the overview of what we've been doing. So we've been talking about Prajna, wisdom, as this capacity to see clearly, right? And that in our tradition, as a wisdom tradition, this idea that we can become clairvoyant. I was thinking about that during Zazen. Yes, I was thinking during Zazen, I'm sorry. Shocker, that my mind was doing its yakety yak thing, but I was thinking clairvoyance, the clear seeing. That is actually what Prajna is all about. And yet, in our tradition, as a wisdom tradition, it's not just this idea of seeing clearly, it's this idea that we can practice seeing. And that in our practice, that's why Prajna is one of the facets of the threefold training of Zen. In our practice of Prajna, we learn to see, or we embody the capacity to see ever more clearly. And in fact, it's kind of our duty to do that. We'll talk more about that sense of duty at the end of practice term when I talk about Shila, but it's kind of our duty, like the fact that we can see more clearly, it's actually, we have to see more clearly. And we sort of all know that, I think. Like, I have yet to meet a human who doesn't want to see more clearly, even if they're running away from seeing more clearly. Like, we have this yearning, I think, to just get more understanding. It's kind of a astonishing thing. I love my dogs, Sylvie and Opal, but I don't think Sylvie and Opal think to themselves, how do I sniff more clearly? But there's something about this human heart. And that's what the teaching of the 5 mystic eyes, or the five eyes, is all about, this practice of seeing more clearly. And what our tradition's veneration of Prajna Paramita, the mother of all Buddhas, Buddha mother, Buddha eye, what that is all about. So I just want to kind of recap what we've been thinking about and practicing, actually, with the 5 eyes that we've been working with. We've worked through 3 of them. So, starting with the physical eye, the fleshly eye. And, it's our default mode, I think, as we start out in the world, to imagine that we're seeing everything from our vantage point. And I think it's a default mode that we fall back on all the time. We sort of imagine that we're seeing it all. This happens to me. I mean, this may say more about me than about you or about humans. But, that thing where you sort of like, I work now, my current workload is 4 days a week, and I work Wednesday through Saturday. So I'm kind of in this weird this weird pattern. And I often will get to the office and imagine that everything is the same as it was when I last was there, and that nothing has happened in the meantime. You know, we sort of like imagine that like the world is the world that we have seen. And so if we don't know about something happening, then it hasn't happened. And oh, those idiots, they didn't take care of that because I didn't see them take care of that and take care of that. Is this sort of, you know, our default mode, I think, is that we're seeing everything. And yet, life reminds us, even just in our encounters with other people, like the Beatles song, you know, we can look it out that we talked about in our first class. Life reminds us that we're actually not seeing everything. We come face to face with people who see things differently, who are positioned differently. So the physical eye, you know, it's just our default to imagine that we're seeing it all, but then over time to realize in all sorts of ways, both because of our encounters with others, and then also just because we are frail and fragile and finite, and there's sickness, old age, and death, and things like that, to recognize that we're not seeing everything. And that, I think, is where we find ourselves reaching for that divine eye, our capacity to actually somehow see the parts that we're missing. I think that poets very often end up talking about this movement between the physical eye and the divine eye, this movement from a kind of, I live in a partial positional mode that is what it is to be alive. And yet, once I realize that, I want to see the whole. I think poets and artists often end up articulating that movement from the physical eye to the divine eye. At least I know that Mary Oliver does. So I wanted to look at this Mary Oliver poem and not at everything else on the handout. So just direct your attention to the Mary Oliver poem. Don't get ahead of yourself. You can also look at the photograph, which is of Mary Oliver reading a poem to a dog. So the poem is Breakage. And if you're listening to this online, and you at any point, whenever you're listening to this online, if there's anyone listening to this online and you want a copy of the handouts for this class, you can just contact Buddha Eye at office@buddhaeye.org. Okay, so this poem is called Breakage. I go down to the edge of the sea, how everything shines in the morning light, the cusp of the whelk, the broken cupboard of the clam, the opened blue mussels, moon snails, pale pink and barnacle scarred, and nothing at all whole or shut, but tattered, split, dropped by the gulls onto the gray rocks, and all the moisture gone. It's like a schoolhouse of little words, thousands of words. First, you figure out what each one means by the jingle, the periwinkle, the scallop full of moonlight. Then you begin, slowly, to read the whole story. I don't know if this poem resonates to you. I mean, you know, she lived on another coast, so she's always talking about the Atlantic Ocean. But I mean, so much of, at least my lived experience in Oregon, is like going to the beach. Although we don't really often call it going to the coast. I grew up on Lake Michigan, where you would say going to the beach. But we go to the coast. But like that sense of like all of those fragmented things, you know, I think, isn't that like sort of such a powerful image for what it is to be alive? Like we keep encountering bits and fragments, right? And we're aware of that breakage of our own human life, like that I am just, you know, I'm caught up in my individual particular moment, right? Encountering bits and pieces of this world. And it's beautiful. I mean, there's a sense of it being beautiful. There's also can be so often a sense of it being like broken. Right? That we're always right in the middle of, like the broadcast is, what is that? You know, this the broadcast is already in progress. Like we're in the middle of things. We're just, everything's here and in the middle. And this image that she uses of, it's like learning to read, you know, that all of these little bits, this seems so powerfully human. All the little bits of our particular experience, we're like, okay, these are bits of a whole story. I'm going to pull it together. I'm going to pull the fragments of my experience together. That's the movement from recognizing that we're inhabiting this, the physical eye. And remember, by eye, I just mean like the ways in which we quote unquote see the world, understand the world, that we're inhabiting this kind of partial, positional connection to life. And that desire, though, to have the whole story, right, to piece it all together. Does this make sense at all? You think so? Yeah. So, all right. So let's just think about this movement a little bit. So, if we think about our own lives, like, do you ever find yourself trying to hold on to the story of your life? Like, who the hell am I? What am I doing?
Are we not doing that like every moment?
Yeah. Say more.
Just always trying to define every word I speak is a I feel as a reflection on who I am. Every action I take weighs heavy as, oh, in this moment I'm defining who I am from that. I even say things like, I need to find out what I really want out of life. All those speak to my inherent feeling of substantiality.
Yeah. I think, you know, it does seem like this is a big part of being alive, is moment by moment trying to knit all the pieces together of our experience into a singular, solid sense of me. The neuroscientists talk about the default mode network. Have you ever heard that expression? The default mode network is like that part of our mental functioning that's continually sort of narrating, this is me, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, this is Myobun or Esther or Lisa or whatever I happen to be calling myself at that moment. This is me, this is me, this is me. And so this divine eye, this is beautiful. Like, the divine eye is continually trying to weave all of the bits of experience into something coherent. And in doing that, I am shaping a self and a world. Right? The physical eye, we're just like in the midst of it. It's like, oh, no, no. But when we start to like recognize that sense of our partiality, that's when things really start cooking. And, you know, for us humans, that starts to happen when we start to develop things like language, because then we have the ability to really manipulate it all and to create concepts and to create wholes, WHOLES, and in doing so to create a self and to create a world. Right? The wholeness of self, the wholeness of world. Cool, great. What could be wrong with that? Well, actually, that's a question. What is wrong? Why don't we just stop with there's two eyes? Physical eye is partial, divine eye creates wholeness, self, world. Esha? Joanne.
Close them.
Damn these two-syllable names. Joanne. Okay.
I don't know that I have a direct answer to that. I'm looking at the line. And nothing at all whole or shut, but tattered, split. Nothing at all whole or shut. Something about that really stands out to me. It's like she wouldn't receive the fragments as they are. The kind of the shell that they were split. The wholeness becomes itself an impingement on an ability to also then see the partiality.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So, uh, so how do I, if I create the whole story, right? I mean, just think about the way that, you know, I don't know, that you talk about an old relationship, the person that you were in love with, or the best friend that you did have, right? And as you're describing that past, it's now part of the story. There's a wholeness, there's a completeness, you know, beginning, middle, end, boom, right? But they're no longer the person that they were when they were your best friend or your lover or whatever, right? There's something shit, they're in the past. Too bad for them, you know? So there is that way in which wholeness erases the particularity of things.
And having this sense of like, because we're working with parts,
Yeah.
you know, we can take them and we can shift them around and we can make different patterns out of them. And the pattern that we land on is not always, like, you can make what seems whole, but then you can take the pieces and rearrange them and then they become something else. And it's all the same pieces. You haven't changed them at all. And then the viewpoint of the wholeness is all of a sudden different. It's a different wholeness. Like, it's not, and so when we take these tattered pieces, we create something that we see as a whole. It's not the only whole that could be of even those parts.
And yet we sort of, it's now become a thing that we manipulate, and it's like, okay, there it is.
Yeah.
And so it becomes, so how do we create another story? How do we see the possibility of another story?
I don't see the creating of in the relative world. We have to like make distinctions about things. And we create stories because they're helpful for us, but we have this tendency to grasp at them and to create them into these permanent, substantial things.
Right. So there, I mean, that idea that we somehow have landed upon, we've gone from the vibrancy maybe of the partiality where we're totally embedded in the particular story without calling it a story yet. We've moved from that vibrancy to, okay, here's a thing, and there's the other thing, and now there's a kind of stasis that we presume is complete, is final. So the problem of, I mean, this comes back to the self and othering, that this movement of the divine eye is always doing, that we think, okay, there's a self and there's another. There's a self and there's a world. And these are enduring. And this is the only way it is, but there's a million ways it could be. There's a partiality in this completeness that we take as complete. And there's a loneliness, right? I mean, there's a way in which we've created self, we've created world, and now we have that split and that separation. And that itself, like, how do the parts communicate with each other now that I've turned them into wholes? WHOLES. And so I think that divine eye, that part of us that keeps wanting to tell the story, that keeps wanting wholeness, that keeps wanting completeness, that keeps wanting to create stable and enduring quantities, that divine eye also then keeps trying to imagine a sort of an ever bigger container that would sort of be the wholeness of the whole. I think in religions we end up calling that God, right? We want to have the really divine eye, but we want it for ours. You know, we want to somehow have it, right? It's not quite doable, but we keep yearning to somehow transcend that, like to keep creating complete wholes and then create holes that are even bigger than that, and holes are like, does this make sense what I'm saying here? We keep wanting to like get more encompassing in the story that we're telling, like keep transcending the bounds of our finite world. And we can kind of think that way. We can think, oh, I can come up with a concept of God. I can come up with a concept of the infinite, but it's just a concept. Like, how do I actually inhabit that space? The divine eye keeps sort of pushing out, trying to be ever more complete. And I think that push is what takes us into the realm of formlessness, trying to imagine something that is beyond our capacity to intuit the wholeness of form. Okay, that was very abstract. Did that kind of make sense? Kind of? Yeah.
Having had some recent experiences, it's almost like...
Are you referring to, yes,
Yes.
where the default mode network was really quiet?
Yeah. But instead of that divine, at least in the way that the divine eye for me, in some ways, instead of it becoming like, maybe I'm thinking of something different right now, but instead of it going out and trying to create further wholeness, there's almost this like diving in and getting...
So I think what the psychonauts talk about,
Yeah.
is not the divine eye.
No.
I think that is, I don't know where it would be on the framework, but there's a kind of being in the midst of particularity in a way that quiets. The divine eye wants a wholeness that it is, it wants a self with a capital S, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's why the divine eye in Western monotheistic traditions tilts toward God. I mean, the divine eye in monotheism is God. It is the eye of God. Mm-hmm. If you remember back to last week when I was talking about the via negativa, that's an effort for us to imagine, and there was an image on that handout of, which I didn't talk about, but this image here, which comes from a 17th century mystical document of, like, this is the eye of God. It says, it's from 1 Corinthians. The eye doesn't see, nor does the ear hear, right? So this idea of, the divine eye imagining the eye of God, which is beyond anything we can imagine. So that the divine eye is always trying to picture like the vastness of self, a self that can encompass everything, which there isn't a self that can encompass everything, because the self by definition is self up against the world. Mm-hmm. So there's always that separation. But in this movement of trying to undercut the ways in which we grasp onto a solid self and a solid world, the divine eye points us toward the Prajna eye. The eye that is seeing not wholes, not WHOLES, but wholes, HOLES. The eye that can see emptiness, that can see formlessness. And that's that sense of Manjushri's sword that cuts through whatever we think is solid, and ultimately is cutting through the division we make between self and other. So how do we practice that? We practice that in our tradition through questioning. So I had this thought that this is a flaming question mark. I was like, okay, what is Manjushri's flaming sword? It's really a flaming question mark, right? I mean, it's really that ability to just keep questioning, which Zen knows in terms of working with koans. Koans that are going to undercut our capacity to, we're going to keep pulling the rugs out from under us, right? Keep saying no, not trying to obliterate things, but trying to cut through our tendency to hold on to things. to instantiate the power of self. This is that sharpness of Manjushri's sword. I think it's, you know, directly tied to some of the things I dislike the most about our tradition, because I think in unskillful ways, Manjushri's sword can feel like, you think you have a self? I'm going to cut it off through training. You're going to sit through cold zazen, all the things you're trying, all the ways in which you're trying to, all that sharp samurai stuff that's in our tradition, which can be so unskillful, but it comes from this deeply skillful place of cutting through the division we make between self and other. So let's talk about that for a second, or let's think our way through that. So, you know, the classic, why I had a picture of Mary Oliver and her dog is because that classic Zen koan, Chao Chu's dog. So a monk asked Chao Chu, does a dog have Buddha nature or not? Chao Chu replied, not, or in Sino-Japanese, mu. This is like the very entryway in Rinzai Zen through to koan study. It's huge, right? This idea of an exchange of a question that calls into question, what does it mean to have Buddha nature? Okay, we're all awakened. So, Seidan, do you have Buddha nature?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
I mean, can you say I have Buddha nature? Like, what is, right? So this koan is like, what do you mean you have Buddha nature? But what would it mean to say you don't have Buddha nature?
Exactly. That's the reason. I mean, I guess I've thought about it enough that I feel that is a gem inside me that I'm polishing. That's not a gem that I'm not polishing. That, you know, we can chase ourselves around in circles.
So what would it mean to really inhabit the dilemma? Does everyone see why this is a dilemma? Like to say Buddha nature. Buddha nature is just that capacity to wake up. And, you know, we hold as a truth of our tradition that, like, you know, 2,500 years ago, Shakyamuni, you know, sat under the Shakyamuni Buddha, before he was Buddha, sat under the bodhi tree and together with all beings at that time woke up. So yeah, we're all awakened. But what does it mean to say that I'm awakened? What does it mean to say that I have within me the capacity to know full realization? How can I have that within me? What does it mean to be awakened? I certainly am a complete neurotic mess.
What would it mean to say that you don't have the ability to awaken?
Right. Yes. What would it mean to say that?
I mean, it would be like, oh, I'm not worthy of it, or I don't have the capacity to feel. You know, there's just I'm not thinking of enough negations right now, but generally that's the thing that I do the best is think about what I'm not. And if you ask me what I am, that's very difficult for me to say, especially if it's a positive thing.
Because of inner sort of self-critic kind of.
Sure.
So what is it? So you have a settled habit of cutting yourself down. Yeah. What would it mean to unsettle that habit?
Well, I try that on a regular. That's part of my practice.
Okay.
It's to like flaming question marks all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So exactly. So flaming question mark, all that. Like this is what these koans point us to, is not like, is to live in the space of that mood, right? That place that's like, presume not, despair not. Like, how do I live in the place of, I mean, I would use the word faith, really. How do I live in the place of, I am awakened, I'm totally not awakened? How do I live on that edge? And how does that, how, I don't even know how to say this. How can that really be vibrant? And not just something, not just an idea that I've like tucked away into my Zen pocket. Right? So Prajna is like practicing this edge. And, you know, Chao Chu's dog, why this koan is so important is because like what is at stake with this edge is awakening. Right? So,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Because like in this knot, I kind of like, but yes, and
Yeah.
like, it's that motion that says, no, of course there's awakening.
Right.
But I'm not there. But I am. Like it's in that motivation, that motion that says, but yes.
And so quickly this paradox becomes like something we're comfortable with.
Yeah.
It doesn't take any time at all for you to be like, of course I'm awakened, and of course I'm not awakened. Like we can all play the Zen game, right? That's why the Heart Sutra does that work of, you know, neither this nor not, right? It keeps showing us this movement of negation and then negating the negation, and helps us start to feel in our bones what it would be like to not let ourselves off of that hook. So I was referring to this knife edge as faith, but the classic way to describe it in our tradition is to call it the great doubt. So this is
Love it.
this is Hakuin. So Hakuin Zenji, 17th century, 18th century? I'm trying to remember. But he is the ancestor who really installed a koan curriculum in our tradition. I mean, we associate it with Rinzai Zen, but it's a vibrant part of Zen as we know it. And this is a passage from a really wonderful book of writings about the koan, Joshu's dog. So this is edited by James Ishmael Ford and Melissa Miosen Blacker, and I recommend this if you're interested in how koan study might be vibrant and alive for you. This is a great book. Anyway, so this is Hakuin Ekaku's discussion of great doubt. And let's just maybe look at the first two paragraphs. I'm wondering if someone could read the first paragraph for us.
I'm gonna start with the master.
Yeah.
That ended on awakening.
Yeah. Yes.
Master Fa Yan of Mount Wutsu has said in a verse, the exposed sword of Chao Chu gleams brightly like cold frost. If someone tries to ask about it, his body will at once be cut in two. To all intents and purposes, the study of Zen makes as its essential the resolution of the ball of doubt. That is why it is said, at the bottom of great doubt lies great awakening. If you doubt fully, you will awaken fully. Foucault has said, if you don't doubt the koans, you suffer a grave disease. If those who study Zen are able to make the great doubt appear before them, 100 out of 100, 1,000 out of 1,000 will without fail attain awakening.
When a person faces the great doubt, before them there is in all directions only a vast and empty land without birth and without death, like a huge plain of ice extending 10,000 miles. As though seated within a verse of lapis lazuli, surrounded by absolute purity, without his senses, he sits and forgets to stand, stands and forgets to sit. Within his heart, there is not the slightest thought or emotion, only the single word, mu. It is just as though he were standing in complete emptiness. At this time, no fears arise, no thoughts creep in, and when he advances single-mindedly without retrogression, suddenly it will be as though a sheet of ice were broken or a jade tower had fallen. He will experience a great joy, one that never in 40 years has he seen or heard. At that time, birth, death, and nirvana will be like yesterday's dream, like the bubble in the seas of the 3,000 worlds, like the enlightened status of all the wise men and sages. This is known as the time of the great penetration of wondrous awakening, the state where the Ka is shouted. It cannot be handed down. It cannot be explained. It is just like knowing for yourself by drinking it, whether the water is hot or cold. The 10 directions melt before the eyes. The 3 periods are penetrated in an instant of thought. What joy is there in the realms of man and heaven that can compare with this? Sweet. Well, is it so? Okay, first of all, what is he describing? I mean, he's talking about the great sword of Chaochu. I mean, he's talking about this koan. So what is he describing here?
That thing that we're doing. We're like, yeah, I do, but I don't.
I think he's describing like when you really are cut through by that thing that we do, when it's like, I mean, what makes it great? That's like when it all, like your mind just bursts open and you're no longer holding on to this or not holding on to this. When you actually, I mean, this is what it is to, I guess, I haven't worked with the koan like this, but to really like, boom, something slip through the movement of discursive thought that says this or that, or even the movement of negating discursive thought that says not this, not that, but somehow, boom, just steam coming out of your ears, flames. I mean, really, right?
Mm-hmm. The mystic union where they come together and seem to support one another. Something recently.
Yeah, say more.
The mystic union of the absolute and relative that shows that they support one another.
I think it's not that. I think this is emptiness. The experience of emptiness. I think this is being cut through. Have you ever had an experience, even for an instant, where the bottom dropped out? Where just like the world as you knew it obliterated. Does that happen to anyone? A little bit? For good or for bad?
Yeah.
Okay, what is that like?
It's like, not that I've ever experienced this, but I imagine it feels like just floating and free falling at the same time. Like, all of a sudden, I don't even know how to put it into words. It's such a, whatever I thought I was experiencing in the moment before to what I'm now currently experiencing in that moment. It's just like, it was.
Have you seen the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once? It is really good. I think it's that. Let's talk about this free fall floating thing a little bit more. So, 2 experiences that might feel a little bit like this. One might be like something terrible happens, terrible trauma. Another might be falling in love.
Mm.
So whether the valence is positive or negative, I don't, the bottom dropping out. So in a way, I mean, this is going back to the description of Manjushri's sword that I've put on the handouts for the last couple of weeks, but I didn't put it on this handout. I think I wrote it down somewhere. Prajna is like a sword that sharply and precisely cuts through the surface of appearances and self as solid and dualistic, leading into the vast spacious expanse, the abiding, ever-present awareness that realizes, sees, and encompasses that. There's a kind of leveling that, and Hakuin is describing it too, right? Where it's like nothing matters, everything matters. Spaciousness. When the bottom drops out, it's like, which way do I turn? It kind of doesn't matter. Am I describing something that makes sense here at all? Esther?
I was just thinking it comes to my mind is that to describe something like that is seemingly inherently lacking in the typical particularities of discursive thought is challenging.
Yeah, like that, right. Like the minute you're describing it, you're not there. And that's, I think that's why Hakuin says it's like, how does he put it? It's what? Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, there's that cataclysmic sense of it, but that idea that it's like knowing for yourself by drinking it whether the water is hot or cold. This is not about describing something. The minute you're trying to say what it is, you're not in that moment anymore. Is that what you were?
Yeah.
So, what's problematic? I mean, why I was saying, no, I don't think it's that. I don't think it is the mutually supporting relationship of the relative and the absolute, because this vast expanse, there's no purchase. The mystic eyes, the practice of the mystic eyes does not stop with the Prajna eye, because emptiness is also full. I mean, if we just stopped with emptiness, bottoms falling out now, that's not a human life. Right? So when you do see everything everywhere all at once, I mean, that is kind of the story of like, how do we go from Prajna to back to a human life? Does this make sense as a question? Like, emptiness is not a human life, but the human life, the partiality of the human life wanted the divine eye. We want the whole thing. The only way to get the whole thing is emptiness, but that's not human, right? This meat thing is human. So this is where, Donovan saves the day, right? And Donovan is just, and I don't know why I am not a singer. So you'd think like if I keep bringing up songs, it would be because I secretly want to be able to sing them to you, but I would never inflict that upon you in a million years. But he's just quoting this, 8th century saying of Qingwan Weishin Seigen Ishin. Before I had studied Zen for 30 years, I saw mountains as mountains and waters as waters. When I arrived at a more intimate knowledge, I came to the point where I saw that mountains are not mountains and waters are not waters. But now that I've got its very substance, I am at rest, for it's just that I see mountains once again as mountains and waters once again as waters. What is Seigen Ishin describing here? How would you understand this saying? Or Donovan, I'm quoting Donovan too. The lock upon my garden's gate's a snail, that's what it is. First there's a mountain, then there is no mountain, then there is. The caterpillar sheds his skin to find a butterfly within. Caterpillar sheds his skin to find a butterfly within. First there's a mountain, then there's a mountain, then there's no mountain, then there is. Oh, Juanita, oh, Juanita, oh, Juanita, I call your name. Oh, the snow will be a blinding sight to see as it lies on yonder hillside. The lock upon my garden gate's a snail, that's what it is, etc., etc. what is first there is a mountain, then there is no mountain, then there is a mountain? What's being described here?
Makes me think of that there is nothing to attain. That phrase.
Yeah, in the heart
That,
sutra.
yes, that what we're looking for, what we're seeking, isn't a place that we can nail down,
Yeah.
and yet it's still like it's not the nailing down of the mountain, and yet it is still the mountain. I don't know.
Yeah, no, yeah, you're, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, let's say more about that. You know, I mean, Dogen in the universally recommended instructions of Zen says, you know, why go abroad to study in dusty lands? You know, that basically, why are you going to go to China like I did to come back here? The way is right in front of you, and yet he went to China to find his teacher. I mean, he demonstrated that movement of, oh, it's not here, it's over there, which then somehow is needed in order to find it right here.
Mhm.
Yep, you're trying to find his front yard.
Yeah. To find what?
His front yard.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's, you know, Joseph Campbell would say, well, that's the hero's journey. This is Dorothy Gale, this is the Wizard of Oz, this is all those stories. You know, this is Luke Skywalker, this is Arya Stark, this is everyone who's ever been a hero, including us, that we think we have to go somewhere. In fact, we do have to go somewhere in order to come back here. But how does this relate to the Prajna eye and to the practice of clear seeing, of clairvoyance? How does this relate to that?
I feel like it is in the process of the divine eye. We try to make a wholeness out of something, and then through the Prajna eye, we see that it isn't that thing. But then by clearing away what we thought it was, all of a sudden we can see what it actually is. To engage with it at a really direct level that says that we don't need to know the whole. We don't have to have this wider gaze. We can directly engage.
So the directness that Zen celebrates, you know, every time Ojo-san makes noise or does a wonderful, right? I can't do it. I can't Zen master my way into it. He's pointing to this virtue of directness that gets talked about all through our tradition. That directness that somehow doesn't feel at all direct, because the directness I know of is like just being my stupid physical I self, right? Just like, right here, I'm immediate, right? So that kind of immediacy doesn't seem to be getting me anywhere. But how do I directly see what's here? How do I really meet it? Right? How do I get there? There's, you know, last week I was talking about the physical eye also in terms of kind of social justice-y ways of thinking about things, like what it means to inhabit our privilege, and what it means then to decenter ourselves, right? Whether we're thinking about gender or race or, you know, socioeconomic status, all the ways in which we are completely positioned in our karma, in our privilege, in our social position, right? And I was saying, okay, you know, part of what the divine eye helps us do is to see beyond that. And then the movement of Prajna might take it one step further and sort of deconstruct our positionality totally, so that we move past. We don't just question our racism. We work to we do the movement of anti-racism, right? We exercise the flaming sword, the flaming question mark of Prajna. One way to understand this is that that all of that movement again allows us to come back to, yeah, and I'm, you know, a white cis girl, you know, like this is who I am, but not now mired in that positionality, but also not stepping outside of it or imagining that I can deconstruct it. Does this make sense as a kind of social justice, like the social justice practice of this, a way to confront our positionality in the world without either just inhabiting it or trying to somehow surmount it or somehow like deconstruct it, but to do all of that work in order to come back and say, yeah, and I am in this position, right? To see clearly who I am.
When I was driving over here and thinking about the email you sent out and talking about, we'd be discussing the Dharma eye.
Yeah.
I was thinking back to some of what we were learning with the Genjo Koan class about things being in the Dharma position.
Yes.
In that, to be able to meet things in the particularity of the moment that is true, that they are right now, without having to say that it will be going somewhere or will have come from somewhere, but saying, this is what's before me, this is what I need to engage with.
And this Dharma eye is the way that emptiness becomes a tool or a precondition for the movement of compassion. So remember in the first week when we looked at that very first sentence of the Heart Sutra, Avalokiteshvara, when facing Prajna Paramita, clearly saw that all five aggregates are empty and thus relieved all suffering. So this big question, like, how does this relieve all suffering? The emptiness that that Hakuin Zenji describes, it's like, yeah, I want what he's having. It's a bliss state. I mean, it could be. It's a blow your mind state. It's not entirely clear how that relieves suffering, because suffering seems to be completely tied to the positionality of here and now. I'm not going to transcend suffering. I'm not going to obliterate suffering. I'm going to meet suffering. So how do we practice that? I have a very concrete way for us to practice it, okay? And also to consider whether this is a sufficient practice. So on the back of your handout, are you folks familiar with Byron Katie? What?
It's a name that's tickling my brain. But
Okay, so she's she's a realized teacher. She's not within any tradition. She has a very kind of interesting quasi translation of the Diamond Sutra. She works with some Buddhist texts, but she does her own thing. And what I want to suggest is that the thing that she does, it may not tell the whole story for a practice of the Dharma eye, but it's an interesting place to start. So she calls this work the work. And this is her description of it. She says, I discovered that when I believed my thoughts, I suffered. But when I didn't believe them, I didn't suffer. And that this is true for every human being. Freedom is as simple as that. I found that suffering is optional. I found a joy within me that has never disappeared, not for a single moment. That joy is in everyone, always. And I invite you not to believe me. I invite you to test it for yourself. So the work is, for Byron Katie, is a particular way of clearly seeing the nature of our minds and our hearts and our bodies, the five aggregates, and not just to sort of cut through them, but to cut through them in the service of meeting them in their particularity. So a practice that questions, but questions on the path toward encountering. So the work is very simple, very straightforward. That's why we can practice it together. That's why I gave you pens. That's why you have some blank paper here. We can actually do this. So the work is to begin, and we're going to take some time to do it, maybe like 10 minutes, as long as it feels juicy and fruitful, is to begin, each of us, and you won't have to share this, so you can be as incisive as you want, to summon forth a difficult thought that you have about yourself. It might not be literally about yourself, but a difficult thought. Okay. And then once you've written that thought out, so actually put it in black and white on this piece of paper, to then systematically go through these 4 questions. So to write on this paper, and if it's not enough paper, we can get more paper. First, is it true? Is that thought true? And then you ask, can you absolutely know that it's true? And then you ask, how do you react when you believe that thought? And then you ask, who would you be without that thought? Okay? Does this make sense? All right, so let's go there. A difficult thought. Was this, is this juicy or not so juicy?
Juicy.
Juicy. What did you notice? I mean, this, I think you might be able to imagine how this kind of work might unfold in a bigger container than what we have here. It might be really powerful to do this kind of work in a very safe environment with someone that you really, really trust and to have a dialogue around it. But just even in this little Petri dish that we have here, what did you notice with this?
First time, and it felt very clear that I didn't spend enough time in the first two. It's like as time came around, and I sort of like made an assumption that I knew what it was trying to do. It's like, okay, no, I don't actually believe that's true. But the lingering stubbornness that it still feels undercuts. Who would you be without this? Could I be free? And your mind goes back to, but you're not. You still have that. Part of you still trusts it. That's what it's like. And then I realized, like you absolutely know that it's true. I'm just looking at the tangible, well, yeah, I have like evidence, like I have the numbers. This happens more than this. And the only way in this practice right now, I see when the light near the door is like by questioning the terms of my spirit. Who am I? What does X as a term means? So I can see like it doesn't feel the petri dish is alive and it means more times.
I think we often have an idea like, oh, I know this kind of work. Yeah, my thoughts aren't real. I know that already. And so we can go into this kind of work very sort of like, yeah, I've had a little therapy under my belt. And yet there's something about what it is to be this self that is so, that there's so much cherishing that happens here, even in the stuff that feels so unpleasant, that to really find a way, like, how do I, like, what is that thought? What is that belief about myself and about my world? What is it? What am I holding on to exactly? It's difficult, but it's doing a lot of work that I really value. Yeah, other
So I latched on about that.
what?
I latched on right now inside of the front of the skull.
Yeah.
So it's just like, but yeah, it's like, but there's hope. That it comes from all of it. And it is true. It needed to be true. And then you start going around and taking it apart, pieces of it. Okay, why do I need to be true? And so yeah, it's unpleasant.
Mm.
Kind as it is. There's a part of me that doesn't want to accept that that thought doesn't have independent real existence. It's just a story unto itself.
Jinkaku, what would you say you didn't want to put it on paper? Why?
It's really so yeah, I don't want to have it written to a piece of paper.
Yeah.
It might be
Right.
Right. Okay. But it's the first one that you said, find something. It cropped out.
There it is. There it is.
And try to stuff it back in the drawer. But
There it is. Yeah, there it is. And so, like any practice, it's like if you you're like the first time you sit for 40 minutes and you're like, that was too hard. I'm going back to 20 next time.
Mm.
It's like, it might be like the scale of this kind of work, like, oh, maybe pick a less difficult thought next time. Like, the one that you really like, I don't want to take that one out. I heard someone doing the work with Byron Katie who the thought was, I have cancer. So it wasn't like a subjective thought, like, my thought was, I am a selfish person. So it's not like that kind of thought. It's a thought like, I have cancer. Like he did have cancer. And when you imagine the work with that kind of a thought, or I've heard someone do it like, I am a widow. It's a difficult thought. Then you're like, oh, okay, so this isn't so much about simply like, these are the stories I tell myself. This is like, how do I grapple with experience, with life? The stuff that I take for granted. I can't just cut it away. I can't just say, oh, that's just my inner critic. Like sometimes I could say that, but that's not the Dharma eye. The Dharma eye is like, no, you can't just cut it away, but you can't just live in the midst of it. How do you take Manjushri's sword to it and also respect its power, its reality? And this is, I think, the Dharma eye is where we start to get to that mutually supportive relationship of the provisional and the absolute. That is necessary for the bodhisattva way, for the relieving of suffering.
I mean, as much as I really don't like this thought, and it really bothers me on a regular basis, it's like one of my best friends because it totally pushes me to places that I just wouldn't go without that.
Yeah.
And even just the turning over in the head and
Yes,
back
beautiful.
and forth with it, it's just, in the long run, it's neither good nor bad, on the
It's a teacher. It's a lover. It's a friend. It's us. This snippet of Byron Katie doing the work with this man who had cancer, where he went, and I think this is where the work goes, even though this isn't one of the questions at all. I think where it ultimately goes when it's really doing its thing is toward gratitude, because where he ended up with, who would you be without the thought? He's like, I'm grateful for my cancer because it brought me to this work, And so it was like this, like, I don't want to die from cancer, but who would I be without it? I need to be with it as well as to not be defined by it. And that's what this work is trying to do, is how do we be with the mountain without simply being in the provisional position of, oh, mountain. Does that I don't know. I don't know if that doesn't quite feel so satisfying to me, but
I'm really satisfied.
what?
I'm really satisfied.
Okay. I just wanted to- Andy, you look like you had something to say.
Yeah, I don't know what to say. I just struggling with
Yeah.
this because I tend to just look at things from intellectual,
Mm.
philosophical standpoint. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking it's take the seriously no self, right? So like during the discussion, every time I is said, I think no self, and that's where I think the for me there's sort of this conventional reality, like with the
Physical eye?
physical eye,
Mhm.
right, and then ultimate reality. But the two are really the same
Right.
because they're both empty. And it's bringing those together, realizing that emptiness, I think, when, to me, that's what the Dharma eye is. Sort of taking seriously those chants that we do every day.
Mm.
No,
Yeah.
no I, no here. There, no self.
And yet, we don't get to get rid of the self, right? Yeah. So, so there are two words that seem resonant for me in this discussion, and they may just be the two words that we end with or end this discussion on. So one is this word of gratitude, like that the Dharma eye takes us to a place where it's the place of Mary Oliver's poem, actually. Not the whole, not literally telling the whole story, but the way in which the poem speaks into this space of just loving the world, that stream of gratitude for the world. But the other word that comes to mind, and this seems relevant for what you were sharing, Chingaku, is something like forgiveness. Like, how do we hold the truth of our twisted karma? How do we hold the truth of our difficulties without negating them? Can we encounter our lives with a spirit of forgiveness? It's not the wholeness of absolution, like, oh, it's all washed clean. It's an active practice, just like gratitude is an active practice. So the Dharma eye is an eye that is an eye of gratitude. It's also an eye that is forgiving. It's the eye of compassion. And the Buddha eye. It's just all of these at once. So we're not going to practice that because it's just the posture we inhabit as we do the practice. So, we are at time. Yeah, I feel like there's more to say, but let's just chant our way out.